There are maybe 4 type of filters that you'll find on most synthesizers. So the first type of filter is called a low-pass filter. So the low-pass filter, sometimes you'll see this abbreviated as an LPF on a device. So that refers to a low-pass filter. What the low-pass filter does, it will have one cutoff frequency variable on it. So if we change the cutoff frequency setting, wherever we set that, what will happen is on a low-pass filter, the low-pass filter attenuates or reduces the amplitude of any frequencies coming through it above the cutoff frequency. So consequently, it passes all the frequencies below the cutoff frequency. So think about low-pass filter. If we set a cutoff frequency of, say, 2,000 hertz, then every frequency below 2,000 will be passed through. Everything above it, or it's not exact, there'll be a slight roll-off of that. But most of the ones above that would not be heard. So going back to the overtone series, again, remember, as you go up, let's say my fundamental, and this is not exact, but as you have a timbre, let's say my fundamental was vibrating at, say, 1,000 hertz. Then you would see if I were to run that through a low-pass filter, then even though a lot of the sound would be in that, say, a sawtooth waveform, which would have all those waveforms, but everything above 2,000 would be attenuated. I wouldn't hear that. So what would come out on the other side of the low-pass filter would be just a sine wave, because everything 2,000 above would be attenuated. And that's what the low-pass filter would do. If I move that filter up to 12,000 hertz, then I would get every overtone that is above that up to 12,000 hertz. So the timbre would get brighter. So let's take a look at that on the device here. If I take a sawtooth waveform and listen to this again, that's all the partials in the amplitude relationship of 1 over n resonating. Now over here you see a filter, and I've got this set up on LP, which is a low-pass filter, and I've got the cutoff frequency set all the way up to the top, which means that nothing is being attenuated right now. So as I play that waveform and move the cutoff frequency down, listen what happens to the sound. It sounds like it's getting softer again. It's not really getting softer because what I'm doing is reducing the amplitude of all the overtones or the partials of that sawtooth waveform. So as I move down this, I eventually will get to the place where I would find a sine wave, because I'm filtering out all the partials except for the fundamental. And if I go far enough down, the cutoff frequency is below the fundamental, so I'm not hearing anything. So I've cut out including the fundamental. Now you'll see here there's another control knob on this particular synthesizer, and this is referred to as resonance. So often all filters will have what's called a resonance control. What a resonance control will do, it will amplify a range of frequencies around your cutoff frequency. So it's going to amplify the cutoff frequency range. So if I put my resonance all the way to the top, what we will hear now, we will increase the amplitude of wherever the cutoff frequency is. So if I do the same thing, see right now we're getting a strong amplification of the frequencies at the very top of wherever my cutoff frequency is right now. So it changes the timbre totally. As I bring this down, and that's pretty loud, turn this down. You can hear the overtone series of each partial as I go down. Now we'll be able to hear so we're going straight up the overtone series. So now because I'm amplifying all the frequencies around the cutoff frequency with the resonance, you start to hear a change to the sound, and we actually hear two pitches. Then we hear the fundamental, and then we hear the overtone where the cutoff frequency is louder. If you've ever heard throat singing, Tuvan throat singing, from Tuva or even in the Tibetan monks, the throat singing is actually using this technique where the vocal cords are squeezed to where you can create a resonance in the upper partials of the sound, and then you can hear people who will drone. They will make a low sound or fundamental, and then they can move that resonance around of where the upper partials are. So you can do this acoustically. Interesting enough, it's a similar kind of technique. So that's what resonance and a cutoff frequency on a low-pass filter. Next kind of filter we will have will be the opposite of that, which would be high pass. Or HPF. You will have a cutoff frequency in the high pass filter. What it does is the opposite. So if we have a cutoff frequency on my high pass filter at 2000 hertz, and we have this overtone series, what it would be doing is attenuating everything below the cutoff frequency. So it does just the opposite from the low pass. So the high pass filter, we would hear only the overtones above 2000, and we would not hear the fundamental in that case. So let's take a listen to what that sounds like. So if I change this setting to a high pass filter, and here again my cutoff frequency is set at the very top, which, remember, if I set that very high, it's going to be attenuating everything below that cutoff frequency. So if I leave my cutoff frequency set high, I'm running a sawtooth waveform again, and I play the note, we're hearing almost nothing because I'm attenuating everything but a few overtones at the very top end of the spectrum. As I bring my cutoff frequency down, now we start to see the full sawtooth waveform coming through the sound. Turn it back up here. So when I move my cutoff frequency up, so now we're reducing the fundamental, we're reducing the lower partials, and we're just getting the upper partials, and that's why it seems softer, because remember the amplitude of those upper partials is much softer than the fundamental as we go up. Now remember, if I increase my resonance, I will get to hear those particular partials as I move the cutoff frequency sort of in a louder configuration. Let me turn that on just a little bit. So now you can hear each partial as it comes in. So that's a high pass filter, which is doing just the opposite. Next, the band pass filter, or BPF. The band pass filter will have a cutoff frequency. Let's say the cutoff frequency, we establish it here, and it can be variable. Let's say it's 1000 hertz. What will happen on a band pass, it will allow a band around that cutoff frequency to be passed through, and then everything on either side of that band, over here and over here, would be attenuated. So that way you can identify a particular band of frequencies and then allow that to go through and then attenuate everything else. So if I turn here to the BP, which is the band pass, so as I move my cutoff frequency, you're hearing just a particular slice of the spectrum that's coming through. And here again, if I want to hear that accentuated more, I can increase the resonance of it. So the bandpass filter is allowing you to just delineate, to attenuate both the high and the low frequencies around a band. And then the final one that you find on most synthesizers is called a notch filter, or sometimes called a band reject filter, to kind of explain it. So the notch filter does the opposite. So what you have is you would have a cutoff frequency assigned, but what happens is it attenuates the sound within that band, and then allows everything else around it to pass. So if we go over to our notch filter here, and we play a sound. So here again, there's not as much dramatic change there because we're just taking out one or two overtones as it moves up and down. It's taking out a band of those, attenuating that area, and everything else around it is staying constant. So we don't hear as much change there. If I increase the resonance of that, then we should be able to hear where that band is coming through. So the notch filter is a slightly different, more subtle kind of filtering technique. All right, so those are the four primary filters. Once we get into digital world, we can design some other ones, but that's the ones you'll find on most of your analog synthesizers.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.